What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime, and you're about to see why. Concern this evening is continuing to grow about a possible serial killer in the Pacific Northwest. And while the Portland Police Bureau, as it is known in Oregon, is pushing back against what they describe as online rumors, the public wants to know what is going on, including family members of some of the women who have shown up dead. In the greater Portland area, 6 women have been found dead, all under the age of 40, within the last 3 months. So the question must be asked, is a killer on the loose? As we welcome in Greg McCrary. How are you, Greg?
I'm well. How are you?
Great. Just about to introduce you. So for those who don't know, Greg McCrary is what you would call a living legend, a former member of the FBI. He entered on duty as a special agent with the Bureau back on December 1st, 1969. He's been associated with the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime since its inception in 1985. He has provided expert witness testimony in homicide and rape trials in North America and Europe, and he's authored numerous publications, including The Unknown Darkness, Profiling the Predators Among Us. He did that with Dr. Katherine Ramsland, who wrote a book about BTK and was in the news recently as it relates to Brian Koberger. And he was also a contributing author to the FBI's Crime Classification Manual. Next up, we've got Detective Chris Anderson, Detective Sergeant, but now you see he is Chief Chris Anderson at the University Police Department where he works. He is a retired Birmingham Police Department veteran with 27 years of experience in law enforcement. He co-hosted Investigation Discovery Channel's Reasonable Doubt. He previously solved crimes on air for A&E's First 48 Birmingham. He's also the host of the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast and author of the just-released book, The Case, about the most pivotal case in his lifetime. Last and certainly not least, Jim Van Allen is a veteran certified profiler and experienced threat and risk assessment specialist. He has over 31 years experience in law enforcement and investigations. He was with the Ontario Provincial Police, 15 of which were spent as the manager of the OPP Criminal Profiling Unit. If you haven't figured it out yet, we've got a heavy-hitting crew tonight. Real quick, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. You can also listen, although right now we are switching publishing platforms. If you haven't seen audio versions, they will be out, I'm hoping, as soon as early next week. You can also support us at Patreon and become a YouTube member. So without further ado, the remains, as I said, of 6 women have been found in and around Portland. This has all happened since February, and the public started to grow more and more concerned. And with the prevalence of online sleuths and shows like this and other crime shows, police felt the need to come out and push back a little bit. But I thought one of the things they said, one of the agencies, was a little interesting. They said, there's no present articulable danger at the moment. To you, former Agent McCrary, kind of a bird's eye view of this with your experience, does this sound like something or just a lot ado about nothing in your perspective?
Well, again, it's difficult to know, having been on the inside of these things and then watching commentators commentate from the outside. It can be a little frustrating sometimes. Just keep in mind, we really don't know the details, or at least I don't know the details about the victim and all of that. But let's just talk about homicide and homicide investigation just in general. One of the things we know is about 75 to 80% of homicides, there's a known relationship between the victim and killer. And that's why victimology is so important. each of these victims, the authorities need to drill down and really get to know the victims and try to determine what, if anything, elevated their potential for becoming the victim of violence. And if we can rule that out and rule out the quote unquote usual suspects, then we move into the area of stranger-based violence of a serial killer. So, that's one thing to think about. The other thing then is to look at the crimes themselves and see if there's anything either based on physical evidence or behavioral evidence that might link these crimes together. And that could involve victimology to a degree. These victims have something in common or not. So the serial murder thing is something we kind of have to work our way to. We can't have linkage blindness. We can't pretend it might not happen. That's led to problems in other cases as well. So I think that's the proper approach. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure Jim or Chris will straighten me out on that. But that's
Greg. Just to circle back real quick, can you kind of just define for the audience this notion of victimology? And I bring it up because there's a guy named Paul Holes. He's an investigator, retired now, who helped catch the Golden State Killer. Yes. He spoke on one of the cable channels, said that, and I quote here, "Victimology is huge. It sounds like some of these victims were in a vulnerable population." So what exactly do you mean by victimology?
Victimology is the study of the victim. And what we're trying to do with victimology, we look at both lifestyle and situational variables. We try to know everything about the victim that we can. And by lifestyle, situational variables, lifestyle are they a vulnerable victim? In other words, say a high-risk victim, one vulnerable to this would be, say, a prostitute. Because you're getting in the cars with strangers, she doesn't know people, that obviously elevates her risk. So that would be a lifestyle. The other thing, a situational variable, could be just an otherwise low-risk victim walking into an area that is, say, a hotspot for violent crime and becomes really more of a victim of opportunity than anything else. But it's really important to drill down on the victim and get a good read on the victimology, everything about their life. And like I say, try to determine if there are any risk-enhancing variables in there and what those might be. And that may give you some investigative direction.
So one of these people who was found dead, and I believe only one of the 6 is actually currently being investigated as a homicide, but I just want to go through their names because they are people, obviously, except for the one who is not ID'd, who's still a person. We just don't know the name. But it is Kristen Smith, who went missing February 19th. Joanna Speaks, whose family is speaking out, and we'll get to that in a moment, went missing on April 8th. Bridget Webster, April 30th. Charity Perry, April 24th. Ashley Real, May 7th. And then, as I said, a 6th unidentified woman on April 24. The body of all these women have been found. And again, the one without a name has not been ID'd. They believe she is a Native American woman, all under the age of 40. Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson. They were all discovered within 75 miles of Portland. But again, the Portland Police Bureau is pushing back on people like me who are, asking, is this a potential serial killer? However, the family is asking the same question. When you see 6 women from February to May, wind up dead within a 75-mile radius, does your antenna go up as a former investigator?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt, you have to look into those cases as if they may be a serial killer, because the moment that you disregard that portion of the investigation, that's when you become so tunnel visioned and you'll miss something in an investigation. And I want to point out something that Greg said just a moment ago, going back to the victim's victimology. 2 things he actually said that makes you realize how important victimology is. Number one is most victims of homicide are murdered by someone that they have some sort of relationship with, whether or not it could be a relationship of drug dealing, or they may be a pimp or anything. They have some sort of connection. That's why the victimology becomes so important, because knowing this person's background gives you that investigative lead to let you know where you can go when you're conducting these investigations. So yes, it's extremely important. And I would think these investigators would be doing their victims a disservice if they did not look into this case as if it were or could be a serial murder.
And these are three different agencies, Jim, working together with the Portland Police Bureau, I guess, overseeing it all. What got me wondering a little bit was one of the police agencies, as I said off the top, said that they don't see an articulable danger at the moment. How do you read that? Because that sounds like it could change pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's a reluctance on the part of a lot of police agencies to say serial killer. It brings a whole new dimension to the investigation. The media is certainly far more involved. It alarms the public. People are just trying to be ultra cautious about pulling that word and making it operational, and rightly so, because the police are being scrutinized in investigations right now like they never have been. However, that being said, with what we're looking at here, a number of females missing, connected by geography, connected by similarities of time, connected by similarities of age, you have to consider that there's a possibility of an offender possibly involved in one or more of these deaths that might be linked. And I have felt for years that police don't share enough information with the public. They're protecting their investigations. I get that. But they have a duty to the public. The public has a right to know, and certain things that can be said should be said. Mm-hmm. If they are investigating the possibility of common links, say it. If they are structuring meetings with investigative teams, say it. If they're assigning a multi-jurisdictional case management overseer, say it. We're the police. We're doing our job. Everything's in good hands. We've got a lot of work to do, and we'll release information as we can. My thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Chris, you're shaking your head emphatically when you said that. How come?
Absolutely, man. I think I've said this before with you. When you keep information from the public, you're really doing yourself, to me, you're doing yourself a disservice, because look, all of us would love to sit back and say we are the greatest investigators in the world and we have all these accolades and all this other stuff, when really what solves cases is cooperation from the people that you serve. So when you start saying, and I understand, I completely understand, and in some points I agree with it, you should not release all of the information you have during the initial phases of a homicide investigation. You can't do that, but you should let the public know this is what we're doing. We don't see any common links in these homicide cases thus far, but what we're doing is we've created a task force to make sure that there aren't any common links. We have a person that's over the investigations and keeping all of the municipalities up to date on what's being found on certain cases. Because look, I've investigated more than enough serial killer cases that we didn't find out that it was a serial killer until after the person was in custody. So, but that's because and I'm sure that when Greg and Jim and I'm just a little bit younger than these guys, but I investigated cases before the world became this big, with the creation of the internet. And the way that we had to notify another municipality was to send them a little computer message that went on a readout file that somebody read in one roll call, maybe once or twice a month, if that. That was the way that we connected with other municipalities. Or maybe one of us just so happened to be having lunch at a restaurant where another municipality's investigators are sitting at, and we just so happened to sit down and talk about cases. That was our technology. But now the paradigm of investigations have shifted. And it's something that me, Greg or Jim or I, we've never seen it before, because there is this notion that the public is not as helpful as they are, when in actuality, they are your best friend. So I think that by not telling the public what you're doing, because you better believe that they have investigators that are working this case as a serial killer. They're doing themselves a disservice and the people that they serve by not doing so. They just let the public know what you're doing. That's all you have to do. And you get some of this fire off of your back.
I love the passion there. It's funny because as a former media guy, I feel like there was always a cat and mouse game between the press and law enforcement. They really don't want you to know what's going on. And most of the time, I tend to think that they're probably right about it. But Greg, you mentioned this at the very beginning. I'd like you to just kind of pull back the proverbial curtain. You've been in these situations so many times when you were called for your expertise. What is really going on now? There are these 3 police departments involved. There's the Portland Police Bureau. How worried are they? How closely are they talking? How seriously are they investigating? What is going on right now?
Well, again, we're obviously not on the inside, but what you hope for, and just to emphasize what Chris and Jim have said, that communication is important. And just to come out and say, for example, we have multiple competing hypotheses. Could be a serial killer. They might be unrelated. Some might be related. Some may not be related. We don't know. We're considering all of these possibilities at the moment. So just lay it out there. Just don't rule anything out prematurely or jump to a conclusion, get ahead of yourself on, on these things. And I agree. Now, I also agree, you say you're with the media. Too often law enforcement looks at the media as the enemy, and we try to keep you at arm's length and so forth. But what happens in these investigations is that, I've always said the task force I get involved with, I said, don't let the media out investigate you, because they're going to be reporters and the media out there. They're talking to the same people we're talking to. And sometimes they're talking to people that we should talk to that we haven't talked to. And that's where we get embarrassed. So we've got to be, I say we, law enforcement, we've got to be the professionals that are out there that are leaving no stone unturned. And we don't want to be out investigated by investigative journalists. We want to get there first, and we want to get the information so that we can use it. And I think that's the important thing. The other thing that sometimes happens with this within, and again, pulling back the curtains a little bit, sometimes you have interagency rivalries. Some agencies don't want to share everything with everybody. They've got a little nugget of truth, and they want to be the one that's going to break the case and solve it. And that's an internal problem within law enforcement, and hopefully that's not occurring. But I think we probably have all, if we're honest, have seen this to a certain degree, where some folks don't put all their cards on the table as to what what they've got. So hopefully that's not an issue here, but sometimes it can be.
And Jim, in your opinion, how is social media? I mean, we all know how crazy and small the world has become, as Chris said. Some people are even committing crimes while streaming it on Facebook. We've seen that too. But how complicated has it become because of the advancement in technology to kind of keep your investigation at arm's length?
Well, the social media is like the Wild West anyways. It's going to be out there, and people are going to be talking. The thing to remember is if you identify a person of interest in these cases, or suspect, or some other interesting category that comes up, social media provides a lot of police avenues and information, and there are certain classes of offenders who are prolific communicators, prolific writers, and there's always a source, or can be a source, of information pertaining to the crimes, conversations, things that are said, computer records that never go away. I mean, there's digital flows of evidence, potential evidence, that were unknown to police prior to 1990, but are being exploited fully now. So It's one of the things you have to deal with. You don't have to get on and make Facebook comments about what's going on or whatever, but it can be a source of information that the police can exploit to their benefit.
And Chris, the comments are coming in now, which I expected from Nightwood. Women in the Portland area need to be on high alert, followed right here, almost back to back by Lorna. Must be very scary for the female population. I mean, what would you do when there was a killer on the loose, possibly a rapist, and women in Birmingham, were scared to go out? How do you control that kind of fear, despite what you're saying as a police unit or a police department or a police entity?
So the one thing that you want to do as the law enforcement agency in areas like that, first thing, let me just say this: Nightwood is exactly correct. Women should be on high alert at any time. I mean, that shouldn't change no matter how safe your area or you feel your area is. You should be on high alert, and that's for everybody.
And Chris, what should, just give us an example? You're walking to your car late at night at 10 o'clock from a Target parking lot. You're a female alone. What should you be doing? And I'll tell you what my mom just did. She got my wife and got herself, probably useless, I don't know, but it's like a little keychain. You pull the thing out and it makes a crazy loud siren noise. But what should women be doing?
The first thing is you shouldn't have your phone in your hands. That's the number one thing. Most of the time, people that are looking to victimize somebody, they're looking for the people that are not paying attention. 90% of I won't say 90%, but a good portion of the people I see walking out of my neighborhood Target, they're looking down at their phones and they're paying attention to this, while the robber is out in his car waiting for you to get to an area where you can be his next victim. So the number one thing is pay attention to your areas, pay attention to your surroundings. You should always be on high alert. As soon as when you're walking out to your vehicle, especially if you're walking from a restaurant or a store, take your phone, keep it in your purse until you get into your vehicle and can lock your doors. That's the number one thing. Just pay attention to your surroundings that I could see. The next thing that I was going to mention this in our closing remarks is always have a confidant. Somebody that you can relay any bit of information to. And I mean, every single thing about your life, the things that you can't tell your husband, the thing that you can't release to your kids, always have somebody that you can talk to, because it's unexplainable how important those people become when you're conducting an investigation to investigators like myself. So I've had cases where the serial case that I mentioned earlier tonight, we had a young lady who was murdered by a man inside of her home. She was 17. She was a teenager at the time. And her mom had saw her an hour beforehand, and her mom comes home from work. The young lady went to her job before she went home, but then she went over to went home. Her mom comes home, finds her deceased in her house. During that investigation, my number one suspect was her current boyfriend, because of the way that she was murdered, because there were several things that pointed towards him in the case. So I spent the majority of my initial investigation looking into him, questioning him, bringing him in and talking to him. I talked to him multiple times. Every time he denied having anything to do with it, until I finally stepped back and re-looked at the case. I actually brought in some new investigators to look at some of the work. It took me almost 3 years, but I ended up finding the person that was responsible for her murder. That person had committed another murder. Actually, he committed 3 other murders during that time. And I don't blame her for what happened, but the realization, the one thing that I needed in that case was somebody that I could talk to that knew about the people that she dated, the people that she was spending most of her time with. That was during a time where cell phones were not that prevalent in our society, not like they are now. So, we couldn't go and pull back phone records that she had, because this is a young 17-year-old girl. And this is in the early 2000s when this case happened. But I say this to say, always have somebody that you can always tell everything about your life. These people now, with the technology has become so important in investigations, man. It's ridiculous. Now my wife has tracking ways to track all of her friends. They all are in a group. They all keep in constant contact of where each other are. So when, and God forbid anything ever happens to any of our families, but especially my wife, but in a case like that, at least there's someone that knows exactly where she is. Now, I keep my wife's, location, of course, and she keeps mine. But at the same time, there's somebody that always has an idea of the last place this person was found or last place this person was seen. So that gives investigators like myself, like Jim, like Greg, a place to start when we're conducting these investigations.
And the technology is incredible. My daughter's going to summer camp for the first time, and my wife got her one of those Apple tags and a little phone thing to carry it in. It goes inside a watch, like a latch on a watch. So we got her tracked up there.
If I could just
Greg, go ahead
and reinforce what Chris was saying. A war story, but I'll try not to get too off in the weeds on the story, but it's the importance of it goes to a couple of things: victimology and the close relationship. I always say that women their relationships are more intimate and they share more personal information than do men. We get together, what do we say? Hey, did you see that game last night? Holy geez, what a game. Let's have a beer. We don't really get into a lot of personal stuff. I had a case in Cleveland. A woman had an automobile accident. They picked her up, took her to the ER, and she died. And it was, they didn't know why she died. They couldn't find any fatal injuries. So it was just an unexplained death. But her best friend came forward and called the police and said, hey, let me tell you what she's been telling me. And she's been saying that her husband has been making her take these calcium capsules. And every time she takes one, she feels ill. And that day, she'd taken a capsule and called her best friend and said, hey, I'm supposed to meet my sister 2 hours away, but I took one of those calcium things and I'm really sick and I'm going to the ER. She was a nurse and her husband was an ER physician, by the way. She never made it to the hospital. She had the accident and so forth. They exhume her. They do an advanced tox screen and she has potassium cyanide, like 9 times the lethal dosage level. Bottom line, the husband did it. But it wasn't even going to be ruled a homicide until her best friend had called in and initiated the investigation. So the point being, and to underscore just exactly what Chris is saying, it's important to have friends, and it's important for those friends to call in when they have information, and that again goes to victimology. And the other thing too, we talked about high tech. I'm sure what the cops are doing are looking at each of the victims' social media, the Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever they're on, because that can be a source of a lot of good information as well.
Heed their advice and be able to confide in a friend. These guys know what they're talking about. By the way, let me brag for 1 second. If you guys can go to one show, CNN, MSNBC, go to one newspaper and you find 3 guys of this caliber at one time, let me know, because it will not happen. So there you go. That's my 2 cents. Now, Jim, back to you. I'm going to read you a police statement here. The police don't sound overly confident. Again, I look at this from a media perspective. So the Portland Police Bureau publicly puts out, while any premature death is concerning, and we will diligently investigate deaths that happen in our jurisdiction in collaboration with the Matulna and Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office, Portland Police Bureau has no reason to believe these 6 cases are connected. There's no humanity in that, which kind of bothers me. It sounds like they're just incredibly standoffish. But then you look here at Marla Kapoor's comment on the screen, living very close, about 4 miles from the site where one of these girls was found. Wish I had good info. So just going back, to the earlier point, does it frustrate you that police are not being more forthcoming than maybe they should be? And then we're going to get into some of the details of the specific women and how they were found.
Well, that particular statement you read sounds to me like somebody holding their cards close to their chest. And all I can say is I hope these four agencies play well together. I hope they're meeting. I hope they're talking. I hope they're setting investigative goals and assignments and scheduling ongoing meetings, developing communication, rapport. I hope they're adopting a case management standard that everybody's doing things the same way. Leads that are coming in are tracked. Assignments are tracked. The action taken on those assignments are tracked. Information on the victims, medical information like autopsy stuff, because that's going to be crucial to determining what's going on, if it can be linked or not. I mean, a lot of these cases are going to be difficult because these women have been lying outside for a period of time. Weather and postmortem changes, decomposition, mask certain evidence that police are going to be looking for, relation to evidence, what was done to the body, if there's a cause of death. And sometimes it is difficult, if not impossible, to determine. But sometimes it is. So hopefully they're going ahead. There's a lot of information comparing and sharing going on, and the right things are being done. They could be doing all the right things now and lacking a bit in public communications, media relations type of stuff, which is not a sin. They're doing their job, and hopefully everybody's interacting efficiently together, and that's where the answers are going to come from for all agencies.
I find SCS Nation's comments interesting. Jimmy and Jeannie C are friends of the show, on here often, and they live in Portland. He says the media here has kept real low key. I hear more about this case outside of Portland. Followed here. This one hits close to home for me, from Dom's mom, living in the Pacific Northwest. Hope they find the perp soon. And then you'll understand this after I tell you about the first or one of the victims, not necessarily in chronological order, but Carly with an I says, no matter if they were homeless or were suffering from mental illness or addiction, their lives matter. The public needs to be made aware. So that brings us, this is not chronological order, but Charity Perry is the name of one of these victims. And police aren't even necessarily saying that they're victims in all cases, that they may have just, shown up dead. So it's, it's a matter of semantics, and in my mind they are. But Charity Perry was found in a state park, Greg, on April 24th. She was living in Vancouver before her disappearance. She was homeless. That's why we saw that comment. And she was last living out of a tent in Vancouver, Washington, according to her mother. About 9 miles north of Portland, her remains were discovered in a culvert at Ainsworth State Park. That's about 35 miles to the east. Does that tell you anything? The rough age, under 40, roughly where she was found, and she appears to be one of these vulnerable victims when you're looking at the victimology. Is that right, Greg?
Yes, yeah, very vulnerable kind of victim, where she's living in the street kind of thing. Now, again, this is new to me. I just want to make sure I've got the information correct. So her body's 35 miles away from where she was last seen, or where she was living. Is that
correct? So she was living in a tent 9 miles north of Portland. Her remains were discovered 35 miles to the east, I guess, as the crow flies, from Portland, in a state park.
Yeah, how did she get there? I mean, let's ask some obvious questions. She's a homeless person. She's not driving. She doesn't have a car. She's not out tooling around someplace. How in the world did she get there? And then she's in a culvert. Again, I'd want to know all about the culvert. I mean, was she getting in out of the rain, or is this somebody trying to hide a body? I mean, I'd be thinking about that, as well. So, all that stuff has to be taken into into consideration. Again, the victimology, the high-risk victim, and then How did she get there? When was she last seen? You want to talk to the people right around her in that homeless encampment or tent or wherever she was, and try to get a sense for, again, did she know anybody? Was she prone to get in the car with people? Was she last seen with somebody? I mean, all that becomes, really important.
Chris, this one's for you. Hello, y'all, from Sweet Home, Alabama. One of the greatest songs ever. So there you go. Joyce Johnson, thank you for naming these victims. Of course, we should be. Chris, it's funny because Greg said, let's ask the obvious questions. How'd she get there? I didn't think to ask that because I'm not one of you guys. I just assumed she got there somehow. But it's a good point. She's homeless. She was living in a tent in a state park. Again, winds up 35 miles to the east of Portland. What are the first questions you're asking yourself? And also, if you're an investigator in Portland, of your stature, a homicide detective, how much is this weighing on your mind right now in terms of trying to figure out if there's a connection here?
Oh, that's all that exists for me until I can figure out what happened. This is all that exists for me. So yeah, my mind just flooded with 3,000 questions that I would ask, and none of them have anything to do with the suspect. All of it has to do with the victim in this case. I want to know. I want to find out who her family is. I want to find out how long has she been homeless. I want to find out who has she been traveling with anyone. Is she just a loner type? Is there any mental illness that exists in her home? Has there been any documented mental illness? Has she been in any abusive relationships? Is she on drugs? These are some of the questions that these are some of the first things that you want to find out, because the victimology in a case like this becomes vitally important. That's all that you have. And one of the worst enemies for any investigator or any investigation is decomposition. How long was she out there? Can we tell by the stages of decomp how long had she been in that position or in that place where she was found? Though these things are so important. And there are literally hundreds of other questions that I can ask. And none of
Chris, how long does it take them to let you know about decomposition? So if you're asking that question as an investigator, how long does it take for you to get the answer?
Most of the time, if you have an experienced coroner or investigators, they can tell you right there on the crime scene. They can give you a rough estimate of how long it is, because once somebody's been exposed to that type of surroundings and environment, it's really no way that you can give an exact estimate of how long, unless you have some good timestamps, like maybe phone records that would exist to let you know. But if her body's in a deep state of decomp, it's no real way that you can pinpoint an exact date or time how long a person has been exposed, especially if they've been exposed to the environment.
Jim, I wasn't going to go down this road, but it's an interesting comment from Bobby Henson. What are the chances of copycats now with the publicity heating up? Is there already some maniacal Looney Tune out there who's thinking, let me get my 15 minutes of fame and go do something stupid?
Geez, I wouldn't think so. Stuff like that happens, but it doesn't happen as frequently as what people think it might. The big concern right now is, like Chris said, answering the questions about the victims. And, Chris, I'd put Chris on the background for these people. He clearly knows what he's doing. I tend to be more of the crime scene guy. Let me into the crime scene. I want to know, like we talked about the transportation of a body. How was it treated? What was the condition of it? Was the body clothed? Was it nude? Was it? Is there a sexual element to this? Generally, nothing good comes from a clandestine body disposal site. Body put in a culvert, something like that. That's a lot of effort to conceal a body and get rid of it. That we don't normally see. But I want to know about the clothing. I want to know, were there any wounds, coercive wounds, edged weapon injuries, blunt force trauma, anything that might indicate strangulation or something like that, redressing of the victim, items missing from the victim, particularly personal items, maybe clothing, identification, underwear, panties, bras, taken as souvenirs, that type of thing. All those answers should be known now. Through the coroner's examination of the scene, medical examiners' reports, sampling that's already been done, and a picture should be starting to gel in most cases. Some deaths will always be undetermined cause, but doesn't sound like these ones might be. It sounds like there should be indications that will direct an investigation in a particular direction or not. And if I could just take 10 more seconds to add on to what Chris said, what should women be doing nowadays? I agree 100%. All women should be careful in 2023. They should be vigilant for what's going on around them, who's showing interest on them, any unusual fixation, any suspicious activity, approaches, stalking type behavior. Women tend to have a higher creep factor than men. Their antennas go up. I mean, it's hard to pull one over on a woman when she's got her eyes open. So question what you're seeing, question the people that you're around, and do not expose yourself to undue risk through drug use, alcohol intoxication, hanging around with strangers, hanging around with bad guys, and lock your doors and windows. I know we're getting into the hot time of year. Lock your doors, lock your car doors.
Good advice, Jim. So Charity Perry's mom, this is the woman who was in the tent and wound up 35 miles away from the camp that she was living out of. Her name, the mother's name, is Diana Allen. She spoke to Fox News, and she said, I know that she didn't get where she was found on her own, to Greg's point, and went on to say, the person or persons that put her there tried very hard to keep her from being found. Greg, and we'll go through these sort of one by one, but in each case, they were found either on the side of a road in a very wooded area, or in an abandoned barn in one instance. So to your point, Greg, whoever was behind this, if either it was one person or more, they did make an effort to go to a remote area to drop these bodies if they were dropped there. So we have to be careful with how we're saying all this. Yeah. But again, just knowing some of these details without knowing them all, is it swaying you one way or the other? And by the way, you can also respond to this here. Do you think police have a reason to keep it close to the vest, like the Idaho murders they're thinking about?
Yeah, the things that Jim just talked about as far as victims' clothing and what was taken and what might be missing, all that needs to be held close to the vest during the course of the investigation. That's not the kind of thing you want to put out. The idea, though, that the victims or these women have all been found in secluded areas that they probably didn't, if they didn't get there on their own. And again, I don't really know the details. That a lot goes back to victimology, but yeah, if you've got, we're always, one of the primary considerations investigatively is the body recovery site the death site, or is this person been killed someplace and the body dumped another? Well, then that's telling us more about the offender, that he's working in a larger area, and probably a more predatory thing. And again, I don't want to get ahead of myself saying all these cases are related, but even one at a time. Or you've got an offender, with a car or transportation that's moving these bodies, or at least transporting them, whether alive or dead, out of the, to the culvert or to the barn, or rolling them off the roadway or whatever. So, yeah, all that goes into your consideration. Again, are we going to link these? We'll look at all the things that are commonalities that might link them, and then we'll look for the things that are different. But we can't. It isn't that simple. Because Jim knows the case. I was involved in a case up in Canada a number of years ago with a guy named Paul Bernardo. And For example, one of the victims he had dismembered and put in cement blocks and put in a reservoir. The other one he just rolled out of the car, basically, and pulled some shrub over it and stuff. So the body disposal sites can look different, but it doesn't mean we're necessarily dealing with different people. So again, it's keeping that multiple competing hypothesis open. They're related, they're not related. You got to go down both avenues, and then eventually at the end of the day, see what the evidence supports.
On to the next two. So Kristen Smith is another victim here. She went missing, Chris Anderson, on December 22nd, so right before Christmas. I believe she was the first one to go missing. She was discovered on February 19th, so before Christmas and then after Valentine's Day. Her cause and manner of death have not yet been determined. There was virtually no information other than the fact that her remains were found in the woods in a neighborhood called Pleasant Valley. So again, a very remote area in the woods. People don't generally hang out in the middle of the woods when they die, right, Chris?
I mean, it's kind of hard to answer, where people will hang out at. The common, the most obvious, kind of common answer would be, I wouldn't think they would, but that goes back to the victimology. That goes back to, knowing about where this person hangs out, where this person, because she, just because it's uncommon for you, any of us here, it may not be common. It may not be uncommon for her. Maybe she did hang out in the woods. You never know. The only way to find out is for you to take a deep dive into the victimology. That's the only way. I hear several things when, investigators are keeping information close to the vest. You don't want to divulge everything about a case just in an open forum. You never want to do that, because most of that information, there's only one living person that knows that information, and that'll be the suspect. So you don't want to give that information out. Then you will have copycat murderers and people that'll come in and confess to crimes that they didn't actually commit, because they've gotten so much information from the law enforcement officers. So that's the reason why you see so many people or so many officers that keep information close, because they don't want everyone to. There's one other person that knows this information, and he's still out there and doing who knows what. So those are two of the things that I would look into, the victimology in a case like this, and also finding out the commonalities between her and where she's found. Those are vitally important pieces of evidence that will become even more important when you find the person that's responsible and when you're trying to convict that person, if this is a murder.
And Jim Van Allen, Brianna raises sort of the devil's advocate point here. What good does it do to say a serial killer is on the loose? Why do people need to know that, if that is in fact the case?
Well, if we take that jump and just hypothetically say some of these are the result of a serial killer, that certainly ups the risk posed to the public. We've got an identifiable and vulnerable group of young women that might be somebody's focus. These are the people that would be concerned. There's a lot of opportunity to educate the public to be vigilant as to what's going on in their neighborhood. One of the people watching tonight said she lives 4 miles away from where one of the bodies was found. Well, these are people that should be alert to this possibility for their own protection and to observe strange, suspicious things going on in the neighborhood, because that's where some of the pivotal links to solving crimes come from. A suspect vehicle seen on somebody's a video camera or video doorbell going past the road, something like that. That could be a critical lead to apprehending an offender. But risk goes up. People need to know. People need to be observant for their safety and for the efficiency of the investigation. Would be my primary focus.
And Greg, so Ashley Real is the name of another one of the women who was found dead, just 22 years old. By the way, when you look at the photos of this woman, they don't necessarily all look the same, but they, they fit a general profile. In other words, you're not seeing someone that looks like my mom in the mix. They're all younger women, you know. So there's that to keep in mind here. But so Ashley Real, back to you, Greg. She was last seen at a fast food restaurant in Portland on March 27th. Police find her remains on May 7th. So that's basically a little less than 2 months in a place called Eagle Creek, about 25 miles southeast of Portland. Authorities in Clackamas County, who are also involved in the investigation, have, in fact, deemed her death suspicious, but it has not officially been ruled a homicide. There's a lot of kind of semantics in play here, kind of towing the line of the verbiage that is used. What do you read into this, if anything? 22 years old, found in a remote area 25 miles southeast of Portland. And also, this person is asking, are other agencies involved, state police? When does the FBI get involved in something like this? I know I just asked you 30 questions, so
Yeah.
take a minute.
Yeah. We get involved when we're asked. Typically, there's no federal violation if it's like within a state. If there's an interstate aspect, then we might have some federal jurisdiction. But typically, what the FBI does is all our resources, the laboratory, behavioral science, everything, all our resources are free for the asking to any law enforcement agency that's confronted with a situation like this. So, if they want to use the lab, they want our behavioral science people to take a look, we'll make all our resources available to them, but we have to be asked in, and then we try to support the investigation. They're the lead investigators. They'll run with it, but we'll give them all the support that we can and that they would like to have. Now, to go back to your the case the woman found in this Eagle Creek area. Again, we've got, I'm just, just off the public information. Again, we have this transportation, last seen at a fast food joint and then, off in the wilderness someplace. And to go with what Chris said, let's make sure this isn't someplace that she goes camping on a regular basis, or because we all work with mental maps. And this is why if we begin to look at a serial killer, if we develop if we think some of these things are connected, one of the things we're going to do is look for a suspect who has some degree of familiarity where the bodies were found. Think about this. That's the highest one of the highest risk part of the crime is getting caught with that body. So where are you going to dispose of it? If you get caught with that body, I call it the oh shit moment. I mean, it's over, right? It's done. So you're going to go to someplace you're comfortable and familiar with. You go, I know exactly where to go. You don't want to be interrupted. You don't want to be discovered. So if these things are related, one or more, it's that offender is going to be knowledgeable of those areas, be comfortable and knowledgeable and feel it's okay, safe for him to go there and dispose of a body. So that kind of I'm getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but when you're developing suspects, then you want to look for suspects who have some degree of familiarity with those areas.
Chris, you want to yell at Janet? She says, good advice. I'm always the one with earbuds in. Followed here by Dr. Vonda K, who says, how about talking on the phone like someone is listening? I've heard that is a deterrent. Have at him, Chris.
So, yeah, Vonda K, that's actually a very... in certain situations, that can be a deterrent because, like I said, people that are looking to victimize someone, they're looking for someone that is completely unaware of their surroundings. So if you're on your phone and looking around, they're watching everything that you do. So I've seen examples of people who are on the phone and they're constantly looking around, and that's okay for me, as long as you're not on the phone. But walking around with your earbuds in and not being able to hear someone running up behind you, in some cases, you're just asking to become somebody's next victim. So, yeah, let's not do that. The music can wait. Phone call can wait. You're the most important thing in this world right now to someone. So make sure that you're taking care of yourselves so that one of us are not called to your crime scene.
You got Henley's mom saying, I love Chris, who doesn't, followed by Sayoni Green. Most women watch SVU Law and Order to take notes on what to expect from a predator. You might be in trouble. I don't know. I'm just saying. Better off listening to Chris Anderson. So Jim Van Allen, this third victim is interesting, unidentified. Police have said this person is not being investigated as a homicide. And then went on to, here's a direct quote. There is no indication that foul play was suspected by the medical examiner's responder on scene or the officers who were there to assist. And the Portland Police Bureau Homicide Unit has not been become involved in the investigation. They did release a sketch of her, and it was some interesting stuff. They said that they believe she's either Native Alaskan or Native American with tattoos of a music note on her chest and a seated Buddha on her right shoulder blade. What interests me here is just, again, the police language that PPB homicide has not become involved in the investigation. It sounds like there should be a yet at the end there. But what about this one person? What about this Jane Doe here?
I mean, people die. People die outside. People die unexpectedly, suddenly. People die in tents. It's a very rough environment. Living experience for homeless people. Whether this is an example of somebody dying of hypothermia, dying of a drug overdose, some medical condition that the person has. Maybe they can't determine what it is right now, or they're waiting for toxicology results to get a blood substance screen done to see if that would be maybe a fatal overdose or something like that. But hypothermia leaves no marks, and homicide often does. So if they've looked at it and they have not concluded it's a murder with benefit of a medical examiner's autopsy, maybe this one is just a natural cause death or death by misadventure or something like that. And it is not a homicide. So that's, I mean, when you look at a group of cases like this, certainly 6 women is very unusual and better raise an eyebrow quickly, but 1 or 2 of them might not be criminally culpable deaths.
Yeah, if I may jump on that just for a minute, Jim is absolutely right. I used to teach this stuff. I do a little bit, not so much as I used to, but talked about phases of the investigation. And the first phase is to determine whether or not a crime has been committed, because you can get ahead of yourselves. You figure, oh, we're law enforcement, we're called to the scene, must be a crime. No, not necessarily. So in the second phase is, if it is a crime, what crime is it? Because it isn't always the one you think you're investigating. Sometimes it changes, as you get down the road. So, yeah, so first things first, make sure we're talking about a crime, then we can proceed from there. And it can be difficult sometimes, but that's just part of the challenge of the work.
Greg, do you still... Go ahead, Chris.
Joe, let me just jump in and explain something. When you asked that question to Jim, and Jim gave that deep sigh, and I'm sorry if I couldn't control my laughter, because he's thinking just like I am. I mean, it's kind of, I'm one of those guys that, and not everybody worked cases the way that we did in Birmingham. I mean, we were called out on every death scene that was. If a person died in an elderly care facility, we were called out, go to the scene, take some notes. If everything is done on the scene, they don't need you, then they'll send you back. But they called you out on it regardless. So when I hear that investigators are not involved in the case where a person is yet to be identified, whether or not it's a suspicious death or a homicide or a natural death or not, that says a couple of things to me. That they don't work cases like we did in Birmingham, number one, and number two, that there are obvious signs that this person probably did not die of a homicide. I mean, because you just can't you can't put those two things in the same sentence. Even if you're a media person or a spokesperson for a law enforcement agency, you can't say, we don't have this person identified yet, but we don't know if it's a homicide or not either. So those things should never go together. There's either or. We know that this is not a homicide, but we've yet to get this person identified. So that kind of just lets me know where they are as an investigative agency. They know that probably is not a homicide case. They know that for sure. So I would feel comfortable in kind of taking that one out of the loop or putting it to the side while I work on the other 5 cases, focus on the other 5 cases that there are still a lot of questions that need to be answered. Which, even though that case still has questions to be answered, like who this person is, because she belonged to somebody. We need to find out who she belonged to. But
Greg, that's all. I mean, that's a great point, Chris. And Greg, I was going to ask you, do you still get called by agencies who are stumped and need someone with your expertise? That is number one. And number two, I don't know why I keep asking multiple questions, but do you when something like this starts to develop, do your old instincts kick in? Do you get does your adrenaline start to flow a little bit? You try to figure these things out? Always.
I think it's in your DNA. After you're in it for decades, it just it's there. It's there. And I get calls. I do more. If I get calls from investigators, I generally refer them to my old colleagues, to the FBI. They can, they've got the resources. They can do more than I can do as a lone practitioner. I get involved more at this stage of my career, more involved in providing expert testimony in cases. I mentioned one in Cleveland with the husband that poisoned his wife and so forth. I testified for the prosecution in that case. So I'm doing more of that and doing some, still doing some in teaching and some workshops occasionally. Yeah.
Nice. K-Mac, I live here in Oregon, about 100 miles from Portland, but I have daughters and granddaughters. I am worried. And then Tiff Fox on me. I knew I would butcher it. Multnomah. I think I said Multumna, but Multnomah, which I will definitely not say again, so I don't have to say it the wrong way. Jim, back to you here. So Joanna Speaks, and her family is speaking of her last name, 32 years old. What sticks out to you here? She was found dead at an abandoned barn in Ridgefield, Washington on April 8th. That's according to the Clark County Sheriff's Office, about 23 miles north of Portland. They say that they are investigating this as a homicide after her remains were found in this abandoned barn. There are indications that the body was moved to this location, the sheriff's office said in a statement. And again, they reiterate this is being investigated as a homicide, and no further details regarding the circumstances of the body are being released at this time. I mean, it's a lot of effort to get someone into an abandoned barn, right? So what's going on here, Jim?
Well, again, just like Greg had mentioned, you've got some obvious transporting of victims going on, whether they knew the person that transported them there or they were transported against their will, killed and transported and disposed of in the abandoned barn. These are things that have to be determined. Highly unusual for a 32-year-old woman to be found dead in a barn that's abandoned. It seems to me all the travel is coming out of Portland, and it's going pretty much in degrees around the clock, north, south, east travel going on. So I agree with what Greg said as well. What the investigation will be looking for is what's the victim's connection to this area, if any. And when it comes time to discuss persons of interest, suspects, what's their connection to that area? Are they a high mile driver that's all through the area? What's going on in this area? Is it a mecca for fishing, hunting, mushroom picking? What's going on? Greg's comment about mental maps is entirely accurate. We live our lives around activity locations in which we are familiar. And there's a reason why I'm familiar with the points of familiarity I am, and reasons I don't go to other ones, because I'm not familiar with them. So something brought these two people together. Somebody transported a body to somewhere they're familiar with. That's one I'd be very looking at in depth for sure.
And Greg, earlier, Jim Van Allen said he'd want to know the manner of death, how this person died, and the Clark County Medical Examiner's Office did say that this woman's, specifically this woman's cause and manner of death was from blunt head and neck injuries. I think this is the only of the 6 that we know of. But does this help you to start forming a better picture of what could be going on, or not at all?
Well, maybe somewhat. I mean, what kind of blunt injuries are we talking about? Is it just enough to incapacitate or kill the person, or is there overkill? Was she bludgeoned, over and over and over again? I mean, those become things we want to know, the extent of the injuries, as well. So yeah, to a degree, we're going to be interested in, in that. And then of course the other, I mean, and was it, did we have any indication of what the weapon might be? Is there anything that could be deduced from that? Looking at the autopsy or the type of wounds might give us some idea. We don't know. Again, we're always trying to determine if it's a weapon of choice or a weapon of opportunity. Is this something a killer brought with him to use specifically, or was it just something they found at the scene that they used to inflict the injury? So, I mean, these are all active questions, and things that we'd like to know that I don't know. If I could, I don't want to beat this to death too much, but if I can go back to the mental map thing that Jim was talking about, I think it's important to realize we all do, not just the criminals. And Joel, if I can talk about you for a minute, I don't know where you live. I don't know, where you work exactly. I really don't know that much about you. But let me give you a hypothetical. If you had to leave work and you had to go to a party, a house party, a neighbor's having a party or something, and you're going to stop and get a bottle of wine to take with you to the party, when you leave work, where you'd go. Okay, I got this first place I'm going to stop is this wine shop over here. And if they're closed for some reason or whatever, I got plan B. I got another place to go. I don't know where any of those places are, but I do know something you're not going to do, and some place you're not going to go. And that is, you're not going to drive into a neighborhood you've never been before, hoping you're going to stumble into a wine store. You're just not going to do that. And it's the same with these killers. They're not going to just drive around trying to get lucky and find a place they can dump a body. They're going to go to places they're comfortable and familiar with. And that's, as Jim said, that's when we start dealing with suspects or person of interest. Then that becomes an important factor. We want to try to make that determination.
And I guess this is where technology and millennials in particularly can become a problem. Chris Anderson, this comment here from Ibiza: several YouTubers, not me, just for full disclosure, are attempting to drive up to the recent crime scene. Any opinions on that? I mean, Chris, if you were investigating this, you're the lead investigator, and you heard this, how would you react?
That's the absolute wrong thing to do, because now you're infringing on the investigation, an open investigation, and can land yourself in jail, which some of these YouTubers, I've seen them try to do things like that just for the notoriety and the clicks. So that is the absolute wrong thing to do, because now not only do you put yourself in jeopardy, you put the investigation in jeopardy, and you push back the possibility of these victims, that bringing justice for these victims. So Yeah, I've seen it happen, and I hate. And what we need to do as a society, we should stop participating in YouTube pages that do things like that, because that only goes to help the suspect get away and cause for more victims. If this is a serial killer, and if he is operating in a general area, you only forego him being captured, apprehended, and putting the rest of the public at ease by his arrest. So I would not advise that. And as a matter of fact, if people are subscribers to this person's page, I would immediately unfollow him. He does not deserve your follows, because he's infringing on police investigations for clicks. And that's the wrong thing to do, because you allow for more victims to become victims when you do that.
And when I was in media, there were always, that reporter who would try to get across the police line or do something. And like they say, it would ruin it for everybody, because then the police would move us. And so just don't be that guy or that woman. Elen Hologram, thank you, became a YouTube member. Here comes the curveball, which I'd love to get your guys' reaction to, and then we'll start to wrap up shortly thereafter. Jim Van Allen, Fox News Digital, they do a phenomenal job with a lot of these stories, by the way. A guy named Mike Ruiz there, amazing reporter. He searched, as far as I know, it was him, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System database. There are 4 other Jane Does that were discovered in this rough area in 2022. A woman in Lowell, Oregon in May, another in Salem, Oregon in November, 2 women in Woodland, Washington. This is not something that people are even talking about, but this reporter had the kind of the gumption to go and check it out, and this is what they discovered. So that would, bring the number up to 10. Again, we don't know the circumstances, but is that intriguing at all to you?
Yeah, most police agencies that are looking into this are going to do a wide sweep. They're going to cast a wide net, and its similarities to other cases that are under investigation or should be under similar investigation by the same investigative team and management that could answer vital questions for all investigations. And there's different databases by which police can track and run and look for other possible cases that might provide an investigative link. And I'm sure that would be being done, because this is nothing new. And this is Police Investigator 101. Look for other cases that might already have a critical answer that you need to solve yours.
Nightwood correcting me, believes there are 5 jurisdictions involved. I read 3, could have changed since some of the stuff I looked at. A shout out to Wendy. The final person, her name is Bridget Webster. Greg, she is from Milwaukee, if I'm pronouncing correctly, spelled differently, but Milwaukee, Oregon. Found dead on April 30th in Polk County. Her age is not available. There was almost no information on this person in particular. There's a guy named Joe Giacalone, who you might know, former NYPD sergeant. He's a cold case investigator. He says in police parlance, it takes 2 to create a pattern. So he said, you look at these and see what could connect them. Is that accurate? It just takes 2 to start to form this pattern in terms of trying to figure out who's perpetrating these crimes?
Well, 2 isn't much of a pattern. We are always looking for patterns, always. But you have to be careful that we don't overinterpret and begin linking things together that aren't necessarily linked together. I think what I've found over my career, and you watch younger investigators and stuff grow up and go through and get different experiences. I think there's a point earlier in your career where you don't believe in coincidences, and then if you work enough of these, you get beyond that, and you go, how could these things be so many coincidences and they not be related? I mean, it's just it takes time, but yeah, you'll get there because there's some crazy coincidences in cases that are totally unrelated. So you have to be careful not to jump the ship here and get ahead of yourself, linking things on a couple of cases.
But Greg, what about this comment right here on Nancy Grace? It was reported that all victims were very small in stature, like around 5 feet and 100 pounds or less.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a connector potentially?
It could be. I mean, if we're talking again, if we're back to the idea of victimology, which is critical to all this, as we've discussed. I mean, if we're looking for an offender who, if these are related, looking for vulnerable victims, and that is homeless people, drug addicted, and maybe physically unable to defend themselves as well. So it may be somebody who's inadequate. If these things are related, then we may be looking for an offender that is himself not physically a big guy or isn't convinced he can control these people. We have high-end offenders who are very socially adept and can schmooze and talk women into going with them and so forth. Other people who are less organized and less competent just go up and hammer somebody over the head because they don't know how else to get control over them. So if we have a bunch of smaller victims, I mean, that could be a factor. And then if so, then it would go to an offender who, to me, feels he is incapable of gaining control over a larger woman.
Nightwood, Chris is looking good this evening. When does Chris not look good? Followed by this, followed by Janice. I love all these intelligent men. They say intelligence is sexy. You're getting it tonight with these three men. Chris Anderson, again, I promise we're going to wrap in a second. So Joanna Speaks. She's the only one who's been officially ruled a homicide, and her sister is speaking out. She is warning the public, this is family, that the numbers are rising. She spoke to Ashley Banfield on News Nation last night. She says, I think police are trying to make sure that they keep the public from being too freaked out about a serial killer. Either way, women are dying and the numbers are rising. She went on to say that her sister is a mother of 3 and a recovering drug addict. She was the one found in a barn shortly after she vanished and said she was fun and excited about life. She was coming over addiction and homelessness. I mean, there's so much to ask about here, but the obvious one is the perspective from the family members and how does it like kind of tug on you when you're investigating and then you've got very close family members going to the media and speaking? How problematic or not problematic is that?
First off, let me offer my deepest condolences to the family members that are involved and all of these victims in this case. I want to offer my condolences, and I'm sure the entire panel feels the exact same way. As an investigator, when you have family members that are consistently going to the media and speaking out about the investigation, that says one of two things to me: that you've not been as communicative as you need to be with those family members. Because while I understand their frustration, while I understand their reasoning, we have to understand this, that we are working together. There's no way I can solve this case without your help. So if what you're doing is infringing on the investigation itself, then we have a problem. We have to sit down and come to some sort of conclusion as to how we can proceed, because we both want the same thing. That's closure. That's justice for your sister or your mother or your daughter. But it makes it a lot harder, and it puts the suspect that's responsible much further when he can go to his YouTube or go to his news station or walk into any restaurant and watch where the investigation is or on any television that he comes in contact with. And we still don't even know exactly, well, I think we did know exactly how this victim died, but I mean, everything we need to know about the case itself. So if it were me, and I've had my victim's family do me the same way, but usually that's a time where I need to call them all in. We all need to sit down and we need to lay everything that I can out on the table and let you know that what you're doing is only putting justice that much further away.
Chris, you're not even trying to hide it anymore. Tara, I'm in love with Chris Anderson, followed by Chris Anderson's voice. It is calming. My kids listen to Moshi. If you guys will not know what that is, but it's an app for story time. So I don't have to read stories because I'm lazy. And Chris Anderson could do a voiceover for that. Greg McCrary, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah.
So the sister here, Joanna Speaks, has come out and said even more. She said that police have not said anything to us about linking these cases, but we do know that some of the other girls have that kind of demographic. That is a quote, and goes on to say, we are reaching out to the families of the other women, and we've had a lot of tips from the community, and we are feeding everything we get to detectives so nothing goes unseen or unheard. It sure seems like some of these family members think that there is a connection. Has anything you've learned tonight made you think one way or the other?
Again, I don't want to get tunnel vision one way or the other. I want to keep an open mind about this and keep the multiple competing hypotheses in play. Let's investigate as they are related. Let's look at those as some may be, some not. But just look at the end of the day, what does the evidence support? Develop our hypotheses, and then, bring the evidence in. And then at the end of the day, we build it up, tear it down, build it up, tear it down. Whatever's left standing at the end of the day is probably what we're dealing with. And to underscore one of the things that Chris had touched on just now, and we make sure law enforcement is aware of this, or they should be thinking about this, is that the offender often follows the media. Because, again, when I go back, I'd say I used to teach this stuff to law enforcement. I'd say, well, who has the most vested interest in the case? So I do. I'm the detective. It's my case. You got the second most vested interest. The most vested interest belongs to the killer. It's his life that's on the line out there. And he'll be following the media. He'll be looking at everything. So we in law enforcement can only put out in the media what we want the killer to know. We have to assume we're talking to the killer when we're talking to the media. So I have to be very careful about what we put out there. But again, the idea that victims' families, hopefully they are channeling everything to law enforcement and not to the media, because as Chris said, that's going to just delay justice and muddy the water. So yes, please, victims' families, friends, anybody, if you know anything, give it to the police, not the media.
And that's a really interesting distinction you made about speaking to the killer directly. Jim Van Allen, he is a certified profiler and experienced threat and risk assessment specialist. He has over 31 years of experience in law enforcement. He was with the Ontario Provincial Police. 15 were spent as the manager of the profiling unit there. Jim, I have to be honest, I don't know if this is true or not, but STS Nation is pretty on top of things. Kelly writes, I think this guy is stalking Facebook. 2 of the gals, I've not confirmed this, were friends who went to high school together. Coincidence? I don't feel it is. Would that change the playing field, in your opinion? By the way, all the women are tiny, petite, 4'11" to 5'1", some 98 pounds, similar looks. If 2 of these women knew each other, does that change the game? And your final thoughts?
It could bring a commonality in their social circles. They're going to look at all the victims' backgrounds, social circles, and look for repeat players that keep showing up. I don't know if he's stalking Facebook. He could easily just be looking at areas where homeless people are other high-risk victims. One disappeared from a fast food restaurant. I think that if a bad guy is involved here, I think it's shifting downwards in what his lifestyle is going to be, because there might be a very good reason he's selecting victims like this, either because they're within his same socioeconomic strata, or because he finds it easier to victimize women that come from these marginalized or vulnerable groups. So again, like Greg said, multiple theorized avenues are going to be kept open. They're going to look at it, but they should be looking in depth at all, sifting it through as a group, and see what stands at the end of the day. Because that's where the answer is going to be.
Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson, now a chief, a retired Birmingham Police Department veteran with 27 years of experience in law enforcement, now working with college kids. He was a host of Reasonable Doubt. He was also on A&E's First 48. He's also the host of the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast and the author of the just-released book, The Case. You better buy it and read it. Question from Rachel: could the suspect be purposely placing the bodies in separate jurisdictions to make it harder for police to investigate? Chris, and your final thoughts?
That's a possibility, but I would caution our STS investigators to not get tunnel vision because that is where you miss vital information on any case. So yeah, it's a possibility, but I can guarantee I would hope that the investigators in this case, this will be when we had large cases that involved multiple jurisdictions. What we would do was have a weekly meeting with every investigating agency that's involved, and that includes all of the municipalities and the alphabet crew, the FBI, ABI, and all these other guys. We would have them all in, and we would sit down and talk about what was found out throughout that week. That's the best way to gather, collect, and relay information when you have a multi-jurisdictional investigation. So, and even us as law enforcement officers, we have to remind ourselves not to get tunnel vision when it comes to cases like this, because just like it affects our STS investigators, it affects law enforcement investigators the exact same way. You miss information when you get tunnel vision working cases like this. Final words would be for all of the listeners to this podcast. I think that you should all follow this page, because one thing that I love about Joel and what he does, and I would say this to anybody, I said it to my followers on Instagram and Facebook this morning. I love the way that he conducts his interviews. I love the fact that he doesn't create chaos where there is no need for it. He's a person that believes in finding the truth. So follow the page if you've not done so, and keep listening to STS Nation.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. As they say in the fight world, I might have to cut a promo out of that, as they say in the fight world. Greg McCrary, he entered duty in the FBI as a special agent back on December 1st, 1969. I was 5 months old back then. I don't think Chris Anderson was even born, but he was on his way to being born. He's been associated, Greg McCrary has, with the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. He's provided expert witness testimony all over the world, literally, and he's written a lot of publications and books. One, The Unknown Darkness, Profiling the Predators Among Us, which he wrote with Dr. Katherine Ramsland. And he was also a contributing author to the FBI's Crime Classification Manual, so he knows a thing or two. Greg, to you, any chance, we didn't bring this up at all, the killer is a woman?
Well, you never rule it out. I mean, if we had to go with statistical probabilities, we go with a male. But again, as Chris was just saying, we don't want tunnel vision about anything until we have evidence, and you have to follow the evidence, and whatever it shows, it's going to show. So again, you don't rule it out immediately. But if we're going with statistical probabilities, it's going to be more likely it's a male. The one thing I would say I mean, we could talk about this for a long time. From the police perspective, you got multiple jurisdictions, and Chris was talking about getting everybody together. That's great, and you need to do that. But you need, as far as case management, you need like a single computerized program where everything goes in there. So you have, if one jurisdiction comes up with a name, another jurisdiction comes up with the same name, a third, it's in one centralized computer. So when they tap in, hey, that his name has come up 6 times. Let's circle back and take a closer look at that guy. So it needs to be coordinated, and with today's technology, we need to take advantage of all the computer programs and make sure we got a centralized way that we're managing the case.
And Greg, just 2 more quick ones for you, because I don't get you on often enough, but now I'm going to start to call you more. Kelly, wonder if this guy is stalking shows that are discussing him. Creepy to think that he could be reading all this. If this guy is in fact a serial killer, this person, would they be inclined to be watching things about themselves?
Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, it's kind of what I talked about. They tend to follow the media because they've got a lot at stake. We've had some offenders actually inject themselves into the investigation. I had a case in Miami years ago where we had a young girl abducted and murdered. And the witness said, yeah, I saw the girl. It was 3 Hispanic males, pushed her into a car and so forth. So Miami PD, working with our office down there, they're out looking for 3 Hispanic males in a white SUV or pickup truck or whatever it was. Bottom line, circle back after we got involved in the thing, it was the witness who was the killer. He'd injected himself in the investigation to control it. Because who's in charge now? He's got these guys. He's got law enforcement looking for 3 Hispanic males in a white pickup truck when he's a white male. So he's doing well. He's controlling the investigation. So yeah, he'll follow. He's likely to follow it at least, and the bolder ones may inject themselves in some way. We had another case where the guy would hang out in the coffee shops or the bars where the cops hung out, and have a coffee with him, have a beer, just listen, pick up, because let's face it, we all go for a beer after the end of the shift, and stuff we talk about may come up over a beer or something, and somebody who's interested may be able to pick up on something. So yeah, they may certainly follow the media, and may be bolder and inject themselves in the investigation in some way.
And Greg, last but not least, and I have not confirmed this either, but again, STS Nation is on top of stuff, and I will work to confirm it. 2, she's saying bodies were found within a 3.5-mile radius of each other on the same street. Does that change your perspective at all?
Well, again, we're talking about the potential of someone being comfortable or familiar with that area, if this thing is related. I mean, that goes back to this idea of mental maps and decision-making on the part of the offender. In other words, from the profiling perspective, we want to analyze every decision the offender makes, because every decision he makes, he's revealing something about himself. And if he's choosing specific physical areas to dispose of bodies, that's going to tell us something about who he is. One quick example, I was involved in a serial murder case up in Rochester. The bodies were put in and around the Genesee River Gorge and tributaries to the stream. And obviously, what we were saying there, well, this guy is familiar with that area, maybe for legitimate reasons. And sure enough, the guy was a fisherman, and he used to fish in the gorges and along the river. So that's what we're talking about, that kind of thing.
Quick programming note. Squeaky Wheel says Brian Kohberger loves to watch news reports about himself. Wonder why. Those are the reports that we have heard. But tomorrow night, we're going inside the criminal mind with a panel of psychologists. We're going to look. There's some new developments in the Brian Kohberger case. Lori Vallow-Daybell is about to have a sentencing hearing. And we covered the Boston alleged serial rapist. And also there's a woman in South Korea that we're going to look at who said she got so into true crime that she went out and killed someone to see what it was like. That's when the obsession gets a little insane. And then Friday, of course, 5 p.m. Eastern time, we've got 2 other phenomenal investigators, Detective Phil Waters and former FBI agent Scott Duffy. Until then, love you, America. Love you, Canada. Love you, Alabama. What state are you in, Greg?
Virginia.
Love you, Virginia. Can't forget Virginia. And love you everywhere, far and in between. Until next time, guys, hang on one sec.